Hey, welcome back to video number 8 in the DIY metal lathe series. Sorry it's been a really long time since my last video, but I've been on vacation and I'm really busy with work, so it's been a lot going on lately. Right here you can actually see I'm just testing my epoxy granite to see if I can put a Tapcon screw in and not have it break out or anything like that, and I'll use that later when I'm mounting my lathe to the stand. I'm wire brushing and cutting these two pieces of angle iron to length. They're going to be what I use to mount the lathe. These pieces are obviously scrap, so they're covered in concrete and rust and a bunch of other things, and the wire brush doesn't do too well at removing the concrete. I figured out a while ago that actually using a masonry chisel and just kind of hacking at it with your hand, you can actually do a decent job of removing the concrete that way, or just crunching it with a hammer. It ends up saving a ton of life on the wire brush. Now I'm just cutting it to length with the circular saw. Really is just so much faster than the angler grinder, which is super nice for this, although it doesn't quite reach the bottom. I think it's like a 1/4 inch at the bottom there. I'm going and snapping a chalk line and then marking about every 3 inches along the length of it for the bolts that are going to bolt the angle attached to the lathe to the angle that's attached to the base together. This actually ended up being a real process because things kept going wrong. But it's mostly worked out at this point. As soon as I start moving the base, sand starts leaking out of the bottom over on that left side. Shocking, I know, with my $200 used welder that I've got and my complete and utter lack of any welding skills, but somehow I did actually leave a hole there. So I'm going to go and just weld everything that looks like it could possibly be a hole so that I don't have to flip this thing over again. With that done and ground flat, I can go and flip this thing back over. Try to not crush my toes with it at least. Now I'm trying to get the body of the lathe all the way up on top of there. I'm going to go and put it on this wheelie cart. Luckily I've got my dad here helping me out because there's no chance at all I could have got this up here on my own. And it's up. Finally got a lathe on a stand, which seems like kind of a low bar, but it actually really spent a lot of work to get to here. Now you can see those angles that I was drilling holes in. I've got the holes for the Tapcons already, and I'm starting to drill each hole, which actually was a complete and utter nightmare. Drill was just overheating over and over again. I think the hammer function, maybe it just creates a lot more heat in there somehow. I couldn't really figure it out, but the drill really could only make like 3 holes in a row before I needed to give it some time to rest. I'm sure it'd be a little bit more rigid if I directly used Tapcons to fasten the lathe to the base instead of using an angle on the base and an angle on the lathe bolted together. I wanted a way to actually be able to remove the lathe from the base, and my understanding at least is that when you remove a Tapcon from a hole, you really can't put it back in that hole and have it still hold with the same strength as before. So this way at least I can take the lathe off of the base as many times as I want and it shouldn't be a problem. One thing that I didn't think to take a video of at the time, the actual interface between the bottom of the lathe and the top of the steel here is not really perfect. There's definitely some high spots and low spots, and it doesn't have a perfect contact area. I was thinking of pouring epoxy or something like that in between them, but I really couldn't come up with a great idea. If anybody has any thoughts on that, or if it just doesn't matter, I'd be really interested to hear. I'll have to come back to that later, so I'm going to move right on to this, the actual plate that goes under my tool post. I guess that would be the carriage? I honestly, I can't remember the word for it. But this is the piece on my cross slide sliding back and forth, which my tool post sits on. I'm pulling it out of this big chunk that was flame cut off an I-beam a long time ago, and my circular saw is really working hard here, but it actually spent about maybe 3 minutes total, like actually cutting, and a couple minutes of me just looking at it, but it really wasn't too bad. And then I just finished the cut with the angle grinder because it maxed out the depth on the saw. I'm sure that this wasn't amazing for the saw. It's a really deep cut, but it did do it, which was really impressive to me for a battery powered anything to make a cut like that through steel. That's pretty nuts. Now I'll just zip the last off with the 7-inch angle grinder. Gotta get that dust in my lungs somehow. And then I'm just cutting off the other little pieces that were sticking out of it. I just want to get some kind of flat chunk that I can go and mill. I'm borrowing Calvin's milling machine, which is now pretty much up and operational. And it's not done yet, even as of the end of this video. But it's much further along, so I'll just kind of walk through the steps that it's gotten through already. And then in the next video, I'll have to completely finish it up. Now finally some milling. This is Calvin's mill. It's up and operational. It actually does not have any kind of vise or anything right now, so it is literally just super glued down. It's part of the reason that I had to get it flat, and I ended up using the grinding wheel to flatten the side a little bit more so the super glue would bond well. But it works great. Really cool machine. This might actually be some of the first real machining footage that I've actually shown on this YouTube channel I've been making all about machining, which is a little bit sad, but we're just gonna roll right past that and enjoy the happy lines of the milling machine. That surface finish to me looks great. I was really pleased with that. You can't feel almost anything with your finger. You can see a little bit in the surface, but for using like a 3/16 inch bit, to me that seems like pretty much the best possible situation. So then we started just making full width passes back and forth, and it took about an hour, but fully face milled this entire side. After that, we milled the side of the piece here. It's gonna have to stand up square on its side because I'm gonna need to mill in some pockets on the other side, especially for the nut for the lead screw for the cross slide. I'm just grinding the bulk of it down and then gonna take a couple of passes, but square it up from there. And now here I'm just marking where that actual pocket is gonna be because it kind of matters which side I actually mill away. There's one side that I want to use and one side that I don't. Unfortunately, turning into a bit of a theme to jump away from things before I finish them, but I ended up jumping away from that before I finished it. I just stopped making progress and just figured I'd move on to something else. I'm gonna go and start working on getting the threaded rods into here. Basically, I need these threaded rods to go through the headstock and through the body with nuts embedded in the bottom, and I'm gonna just weld a nut onto the top of the threaded rod to make it into a giant bolt. And the reason that I'm filing these nuts is just that way they'll fit in the holes. I just didn't have a good bit that's bigger than 3/4 of an inch, and 1/2 inch nuts are like 0.78 or something like that across the diagonals. So I just filed them down a little bit so I can fit them in there and then use some JB Weld to fix them in place. Now I'm cutting my threaded rods to length, and then just a quick little sanity check, make sure that I'm not losing my mind here, and then I'm going to go and weld the nuts onto the top. I probably could have sanity checked before I actually cut all these up, but that's okay. Alright, bolts are done. Now rapid fire jump to the next thing. Cutting out, this is going to be the plate that the motor mounts to, the main motor, and now I'm going to use this hinge to allow me some movement so that way I can actually tension the belt that the motor is going to be pulling on. Drilling my 3 holes for the hinge, and luckily I actually put them in the right place for once, and we're going to ignore the magical lack of tapping. I meant to record that, but I guess not. I actually used a masonry bit at the bottom of each of these holes afterwards, and that made it way easier to tap in the epoxy granite. I'd been having some trouble with that before, but this actually went really smoothly and only took a few minutes. Now I'm marking and drilling the holes for my motor. I put some blue Dykem on the plate, and then I'm actually kind of pleased with this solution for marking out those oval shaped holes. I took the smallest Allen wrench that I could find, and I actually used it as a scraper, and I could kind of drag it around and make a scratch in the Dykem. It actually made a really nice, easy to read mark, and then I just centered my center punch in the middle of those, and that worked great. I did unfortunately have to cut all these bolts short. I was trying to just use bolts I already had lying around, and these are like 1-inch bolts, and they were gonna work, but they were gonna sort of risk stabbing into the epoxy granite every time that hinge swung towards the headstock. So I just cut these about maybe 1/4 of an inch shorter, and then did my best to file them so that they thread in nicely. And they seem to work great, so that worked. Getting that hinge actually screwed in was a bit of a nightmare, but whatever, I did it, I survived. And now I just need a little bolt sticking out of there so that way I can actually tension this motor by screwing the bolt in and out. So I'll just quickly drill and tap that hole, and then I just have a carriage bolt on one side, so I've got a nice rounded face pushing against the headstock. And then on the other side I had an old knob that was scrapped from another project. Now that at least one thing is working, I can finally put out another video. So that's about all I have. The next video should come out way sooner than this one, but there it is. That's the motor mounted on the lathe, which is now on the stand. Still got a bit of work to do, but it's getting there. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.